the majority of recyclable products and compostables out in the market actually end up in landfills. And even when a compostable product does biodegrade, guess what? It turns into methane, which is often worse than CO2. What can be done about all of this? Well, the solution is two-parted. One, we can make plastics from renewable materials that are easier to recycle, compost, and are biodegradable. And two, we fix the waste stream so plastics are properly dealt with. I got a chance to sit down with an expert in plastics to learn about this situation. Dillon Baxter is the co-founder and CEO of PlantSwitch, a company producing bioplastic resin. And what's that bioplastic being made out of? You guessed it, plants. PlantSwitch's mission is to replace all petroleum-based single-use plastic with plants. Here's Dillon to explain the plastic problem and their novel solution to it.
So we use agricultural byproducts, which means we're not competing with food sources. And this is a waste stream from major food production. So we give that a second life. We upcycle that. We've developed IP around a lot of these different byproducts, but the one that we like the most right now that we're going to market with is rice husks. So that's just the sheath that protects the rice kernel. It gets discarded through the rice production process. And right now it's actually an environmental issue because a lot of it gets burned, incinerated, landfilled. You know, there's some minor underdeveloped markets for it, but it's pretty limited. So we're able to, give that waste a second life, while also having a really low raw material cost, which is important if you're going to compete with something like plastic.
Any interesting anecdotes about ways that you've proven to others that the product is durable enough to be considered effective and useful?
So one thing I like to do is, you have investors come visit the facility or whatever, take them to a nice steak dinner, and then you give them your plant-based utensils and say, hey, try to eat with this.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah, and then when it works, they're pretty blown away. I mean, there's not a much better way to prove the concept of a product than to, put a piece of steak in your mouth and it works. So.
Absolutely fascinating. I was inspired by your story. Could you tell us a bit about how you came across the idea that ultimately became PlantSwitch? Yeah,
so I was a senior in college, working at a private equity firm, had a internship where I was doing a lot of due diligence and research. And one of the companies that came across the docket was a packaging company that was launching a compostable line. And so I got to do a deep dive on the whole compostable landscape and learned a lot and realized that the plastic problem was way bigger than I had originally thought.
Sure.
The statistics are terrifying. And then B, none of the solutions that were on the market really made a ton of sense. Everything was way too expensive. It didn't work well enough, or the worst one to me was it wasn't even truly biodegradable or compostable. So, most of the incumbent technology had to get heated up really hot in order to biodegrade or compost. So it has to go to a composting facility, and less than 5% of the compostable products actually make it to a composting facility. So it wasn't really solving the problem. And so that's where we realized that there was a really large opportunity for a better replacement.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, it's going to go into the landfill, and the hope by those companies is that it does, in fact, get very hot in the landfill when it gets capped eventually in 50 or 100 years. But you raise a great point. We are creating mountains of waste, most of it plastic, very little of it compostable. How did you first go about the process of capitalizing your first ideas?
So one of the interesting things about our business was, we are a material science company and we've developed proprietary technology, but we actually started the business with more of a redistribution model. So there were some existing products overseas and Mexico that, were better than what was currently on the market. And we realized that. So we started importing and redistributing those. And what that allowed us to do was solve distribution before we solved product. And it also gave us a lot of real-time customer feedback and market insight as to what we need to develop for our own technology. And so that's definitely not the typical way that a materials science company or really most deep tech ventures start. But I think there were a lot of advantages for us to do it that way.
Yeah. Was there a moment where you realized you'd sort of found product market fit and needed to really start reverse engineering how to not import more and create your own?
Yeah, absolutely. So there was a huge inflection point. So we started the business in January of 2020.
Oh, great timing.
Yeah, we got our first imported shipment of product a week before the global lockdowns.
Yes.
So really great timing. And at that point, I had a full-time investment banking job lined up after college. I was like, I'm not going to do this. I even told my co-founder,
Wow.
I'm out, find someone else to do this.
Wow.
And so was pretty out on the idea. But then we were in Dallas, which is not typically the most climate-friendly environment that you would think.
Yeah.
And but however, things started to open up in Dallas a little bit before other places,
Right.
From restaurants, bars, etc. And we started trying to sell to restaurants, businesses in Dallas, and weirdly enough, even out of the pandemic, we saw great adoption, and we were selling at a pretty significant premium to traditional plastic products. So. Anyways, once we saw that, we were like, okay, well, if we're selling this in Dallas right out of the pandemic at such a high premium, that means that this product market fit is really strong and can go across the country to areas where there's even more demand for it and do really well. But we recognized the limitations of the product we were importing.
Sure.
We knew the future of, the bioplastic or biodegradable plastic industry was what we could develop, and that allowed us to have a lot of conviction to go develop our own technology.
What is it about your evaluation of the incumbent technology, companies like WorldCentric, for example, that already offer well-known, well-established brands in, for example, compostable cutlery that made you feel like you could have a sustainable advantage?
Yeah, so the incumbent technology for compostable plastics, and this is pretty much any bioplastic product that you've seen labeled compostable, is typically made from a material called PLA. And this is advertised as commercially compostable, which means that in order for it to compost, it has to go to a commercial composting facility, has to get heated up over around 150 degrees Fahrenheit, and then it will biodegrade. But it won't do that unless it gets into that facility. And if it doesn't get to that facility, it will biodegrade into methane, which is actually worse than CO2. So
wow.
It's not really a great product, and a lot of companies have recognized that and are trying to find the next thing. But that is, really who has dominated the industry to date, and it's not really solving the problem, unfortunately.
I have heard at least a rumor that WorldCentric and several other leaders are in fact just reselling one manufacturer's product out of Asia. Is that true?
Pretty much. So the major brands that I mentioned that are carrying these PLA products, they're not manufacturing it themselves. They're typically contracting that out to China and using the same material. And then they import it, slap their brand on it, call it compostable, and then put it into the market. Not that there's necessarily anything wrong with that, but it's not really a differentiated technology, and they're not really doing much other than slapping a brand on a Chinese product.
Fair enough. You've recently announced that you are going to have a facility here in Sanford, North Carolina. Tell me more about that facility and the progress that you've made.
Yeah, so that's a 50,000 square foot facility in Sanford, North Carolina. We'll be able to produce about 50 million pounds of bioplastic resin a year out of that facility. We also have world-class lab and development capabilities. So that's really serving as the first commercial facility and also a proof of concept and R&D facility all in one. So we believe that production in America is really important, especially given a lot of the issues that food service companies had sourcing product over COVID.
Indeed.
And so we've found that to be a really great, compelling sales pitch and differentiating factor for us is being able to make our own products in America.
So I have another question that probably I'm speaking on behalf of my wife, who is herself very skeptical of the whole entire recycling industry. You've focused on compostable, and most homeowners, most business owners, frankly, would be thinking, well, why do we even need this whole compostable thing? We have recycling. Can't we just take the plastic that we create and put it into the recycling waste stream? Can you tell us about the reason why you're leaning more towards compostable products than traditional plastics for recycling?
So there's a few points that I'm going to cover here. And with recycling, it is a noble effort, and it works really well for a lot of materials. But unfortunately, for things like single-use food packaging, it's really difficult to recycle those materials. We only really recycle effectively one type of plastic, and there are hundreds of different types of plastic. When that plastic becomes contaminated with food waste, it becomes almost impossible for the recycler to work with it. In addition, when you're recycling plastic, there's two ways that you can do it. You can do it mechanically or you can do it chemically. The majority of it is done now mechanically, and that's been shown to increase microplastics in the environment. You can't infinitely recycle plastic mechanically, and it actually just loses a lot of its properties once you put it through the recycling stream. So all you're really doing is extending the inevitable death of the plastic product another few cycles and adding more energy to the process when you try to recycle it. That's why we focus on composting and biodegradation as a better end-of-life solution, specifically for single-use food packaging. Recycling definitely has its role in the circular economy, and we still need to get better at it and increase the infrastructure, but it's really not a solution for the products that we are targeting. And so we're trying to create something that, and we have created something that is truly biodegradable and compostable in the natural environment, not just a commercial composting facility.
It's fascinating, the reality that what we've been told for most or all of our lives and most of our parents' lives is this sort of fiction around recycling is, unfortunately not producing the results that we all thought that it might in terms of our eco-conscious and environmental desires would otherwise justify or yield.
So on that point, this is actually a pretty interesting piece of history. The onus of recycling on the consumer was actually started by the big plastics companies.
For sure, yeah.
So there was a campaign that still is in existence today called, I believe, Keep America Beautiful back in the 60s, which was in response to the Delaware bottling law. This is when the first plastic bottles came out and replacing glass bottles. They realized environmentally that this was not a good solution.
Yeah.
And so they banned plastic bottles in the state of Delaware, and then the lobbying organization Keep America Beautiful was created in order to combat that. And then they pushed a pretty vicious ad campaign for pushing the blame of plastic waste onto the consumer. There was a campaign around someone littering and saying that's the issue. That was all funded by Coke, Pepsi, and the big plastic producers.
Man.
So really, if you look back to the origins of recycling and how that came to be, it's all been funded by the plastic folks to protect their own interests.